The narrative opens with 20-year-old David Vornell cradling his newborn daughter Angel, whose very appearance, a perfect mirror of his own, immediately captivates him. As the infant beams and babbles, David ponders whether she recognizes him as her father. An undeniable pull, a bond forged by blood and perhaps even affection, overwhelms him, though he struggles to comprehend these unexpected emotions. Like most ability users in the Empire, this child had been conceived solely as an obligation to continue the family line, bred with the same precision as a stud horse. David had believed that his feelings would be limited to duty, that she was nothing more than a small being sharing his blood and destined to become an ability user, a noble, and eventually a soldier. Yet, the very moment he beheld her, he realized he could not permit her to live a life akin to his own. With resolute determination, he pressed a kiss to her forehead and advanced through the chaotic, wretched battlefield. At that juncture, the child's biological mother, 20-year-old Sophie, confronted him with a pointed question. Was he attempting to abscond with their child? David admitted that he did not wish to force her to endure the harsh fate that he himself had known. Sophie, reminding him that the child was as much hers as his, was taken aback when David proposed that they leave together. She scoffed at his impulsiveness and declared that, as ability users and nobles of the Empire, they were born to face a doomed destiny, and this child was no exception. Acknowledging that having a daughter might indeed alter one's perspective, Sophie's words stung as David gritted his teeth in frustration. However, he halted in his tracks when she ordered him to go. David then confided to Sophie that he intended to head to Zenon, though he was uncertain whether he would remain there. With a wry smile, Sophie wished him luck. On that fateful day, the Empire's sole swordmaster, David Vornell, vanished, a mystery that had lingered for 7 years. Now, having concealed his true identity, David lives under a new guise as the father of a beloved princess. In a completely different scene, James Brown, known far and wide as the ultimate domestic parent, dons an adorable cherry-patterned apron and wields a spatula. At daybreak, he rouses his daughter with the enticing aroma of her favorite chicken egg dish, while, upon sniffing the air, he comically laments the smell of broccoli. Though Alara is not fond of the vegetable, James offers a deal: 2 pieces of broccoli in exchange for chocolate macarons for dessert. Despite her initial irritation, she is precisely the type of child who might eventually succumb to such playful bargaining. Now 7 years old, Alara Brown harbors a secret that sets her apart from other children. As she grows, faint memories of her past life begin to resurface, and she comes to enjoy peaceful, joyful days alongside her father, James, a master of homemaking and parenting. Around the age of 3, fragments of her previous existence started to return, and by 7, her recollections were complete. Among these memories was the startling awareness that the world she now inhabited was, in fact, the setting of a fantasy novel. In her former life, she had not been human at all, but a graduate student whose existence had been unworthy of mortal life. At the tender age of 25, she succumbed to the toll of overwork, staying up night after night to finish her thesis, titled A Study on the Characteristics of Social Reforms Suggested in Fiction, which centered on the fantasy epic * rebellion of DOS*. She marveled at how the overwhelming stress had led her to reincarnate into the very narrative of that novel. Even though these memories occasionally surfaced, she instinctively immersed herself in her current life, yet her childish aversion to broccoli remained unchanged. One morning, while James gently brushed Alara's hair, he inquired whether she preferred sporting playful bunny ears or a regal princess hairstyle. Alara suggested tying her hair herself, but James laughed, remarking that she was still too little to reach his waist. In protest, she argued that her small stature was inexplicably even less than that of the 5-year-old next door, though her mind was as sharp as any adult's. Ultimately, she relented and requested that her father create bunny ears for her. Shortly afterward, James instructed her to play at the neighbor's house while he headed to the market. Though Alara wished to accompany him, he warned that it was perilous due to the presence of the intimidating uncle soldiers, a reference to the elite members of the Imperial Royal Army, dispatched from the capital to patrol these remote territories. In the world of * rebellion of DOS*, humanity was divided into 2 stark groups: those endowed with magical abilities, known as ability users, and those without, the powerless. Ability users enjoyed noble titles and preferential treatment, but their society was structured with an inflexible hierarchy based on individual prowess. Frequent wars erupted, and ability users were often conscripted into these brutal conflicts. Even the main characters sometimes met merciless deaths, while ordinary humans, like the powerless, were relegated to minor roles, a category into which both Alara and her father fell. James, with his unremarkable brown hair and equally unremarkable brown eyes, was perceived by Alara as little more than an extra in the grand narrative of their lives. She often spoke out about how being born ordinary was a blessing in a treacherous world, and she treasured the simple, happy life she led with her father. James, feeling awkward about the candid observation, agreed with her. After bidding farewell at Susan's house, he departed for the market, leaving Susan and her husband to care for Alara. Later, Susan's husband recalled that he had never known James was Alara's father. He recounted how the quiet young man had mysteriously appeared in their mountain village and lived in near silence, as if harboring an untold story. One evening, Susan recounted how James arrived at their door, pale and anxious, clutching a crying baby whose hunger had been masked by an over-reliance on formula, despite being over 5 months old. Concerned, Susan prepared solid baby food, and from that day on, James became exceedingly polite and eager to learn everything about parenting. As he fumbled through his new responsibilities, Susan's husband playfully teased Alara about winning at cards, a game in which she soon countered with a full house and confidently proposed playing again the next day. After leaving Susan's house, Alara cheerfully announced that she was off to do the laundry before her father's return, a task that, humorously, included his underwear, as she innocently warned Susan against interfering. With that, she set off into the woods toward a nearby lake, fully aware that her secret laundry endeavors were something her father disapproved of, yet determined to continue regardless. In her previous life, Alara had been an orphan, and her only recollection of care was that of a kind guardian. Her current father, who had from a very young age managed everything from changing diapers to preparing meals and bathing her. This daily devotion forged an unbreakable bond between them, one that she cherished deeply. She dreamed of growing up quickly so she could someday repay him with true filial piety. As she toiled, she reflected on the tranquility of life as a mere extra, content in its simplicity despite the commoner status imposed on her, a status that rendered her less than human in the eyes of others. Without warning, the sound of approaching hooves startled her. Looking up, Alara saw a line of horses drawing near, only to halt when they laid eyes on the small girl. Recognizing the imperial crest and the distinctive blue cloaks, she understood that these were DOS-class knights of the Empire. One of the soldiers promptly ordered her capture. Using a magic wand to test her, he declared that she was indeed the gifted daughter of David Vornell. In disbelief, Alara protested, insisting that there must be a mistake, but the soldier insisted that his judgment was accurate by mere observation. Desperate, she pleaded with him to release her and inquired after David Vornell. When the soldier asked who David was, her mind raced back to the contents of the novel. David was the formidable commander of the DOS Holy Knight Order, the most powerful military force in the story. In his youth, he had lost his own daughter to the imperial family, and on one fateful day, he had honed his blade for vengeance. It was also then that he had taken in and raised a promising young man named Cheshire as his adopted son, thereby establishing himself as one of the primary protagonists. Observing that the soldiers were searching for David and his daughter suggested that these events were set before the original narrative's timeline, implying that David's daughter was still alive, and leaving Alara to wonder what connection this revelation held for her. Overwhelmed by the situation, Alara begged the soldier to let her sit, warning that she might become ill if forced to remain standing. Recognizing his distinctive black hair and blue eyes, she recalled a character from the story. She attempted to explain that although she bore a resemblance to David, her father was actually James Brown, and that she had been told her features came from her mother, who had long since departed. Just then, James emerged onto the scene, sword in hand, and confronted the soldiers with unwavering resolve. His commanding presence and fierce determination were impossible to ignore. Standing firm with his weapon glinting ominously, he demanded that they release his daughter, warning of dire consequences if they failed to comply. Alara watched in disbelief as her heart pounded, questioning whether her father had lost his mind or was oblivious to the gravity of the situation. Even though these men wielded significant power and influence, enough that even a single act of disrespect toward a high-ranking noble could be punishable by death. Her father was not merely being disrespectful, he was openly threatening them with violence. In a final plea to de-escalate matters, Alara urged the soldier to consider that her father was not acting like himself, his behavior driven by a temporary lapse in composure. Her voice, heavy with both fear and urgency, did little to sway the man, who callously shoved her aside and refocused on James. With deliberate, menacing steps closing the distance, the soldier exuded authority and disdain as he demanded answers. Why had he come, and what was his purpose? At the same time, James reiterated his demand that his daughter be released immediately. The air was thick with tension, each side steadfast in its resolve as the confrontation threatened to spiral into further violence. Torn between her fear for her father's safety and her disbelief at his audacity, Alara could only hope that the situation would somehow resolve without further escalation. The soldier then addressed James by the name David Vornell, informing him that the emperor had commanded his immediate return to the order to fulfill his duty. Once more, Alara protested that her father's name was not David. The knight insisted, however, that several years had passed and that it was time for him to end his life as a fugitive. Citing Pavilion military law, where deserters were subject to immediate execution until their whereabouts were verified and treated as Class 1 criminals, he reminded David that, despite his past devotion and abilities having once earned him the emperor's favor, all his previous transgressions had now been overlooked no longer. The soldier relayed the emperor's decree. From that moment on, David Vornell must return to the order and resume his duty. David smirked in response, remarking wryly that the emperor's words were as flashy as ever, likening them to an empty kennel kept ready for its stray dog's return. Realizing that she must act before matters worsened, Alara bit the soldier's hand and broke free, dashing toward her father. The knight commander quickly intercepted her, and in a meek tone, she implored him to spare her father's life, apologizing and promising to cooperate fully with any investigation if it meant they could locate David, whichever name he now bore, in exchange for her father's safety. In that moment, James unleashed a tremendous surge of energy, a display that caught the commander's attention and confirmed Alara's immense shock. The 27-year-old single father, who had long hidden his true identity in a secluded mountain village, now revealed who he truly was. The commander handed Alara over to a guard, instructing him to ensure she remained unharmed. Embarrassed, Alara apologized, admitting that she had only just learned the truth. The commander then attempted to charge David, but David retorted angrily, questioning how the commander intended to subdue him. When the soldier dared to touch his daughter, David's anger flared and his grip on his sword tightened. A guard, holding Alara, pointed his sword at David, ordering him to stop and surrender peacefully to guarantee his daughter's safety. This only incited further fury in David, who mocked the so-called Holy Knight order for threatening his child. The commander maintained that he was simply executing the emperor's orders, reiterating that the emperor had commanded David's return by any means necessary. David declared that he had renounced the Vornal name and no longer wished to live under the imperial family's oppressive rule. In response, the commander pointed his sword at him and declared that this was not a matter of choice, but one of obligation. Another guard reiterated the need to protect Alara at all costs. At that point, Alara, in a clear and decisive tone, summarized the situation. Her father, whom she had assumed to be merely an extra in the background, was in truth the hidden protagonist David Vornell, and she was an integral part of his epic. This revelation, steeped in the tragedy of his youth, when he had lost his own daughter to the imperial family, was the catalyst for his quest for vengeance. Overwhelmed by the reality of the narrative, Alara silently wept for the simple life she once knew as an extra. With unexpected clarity, she clapped her hands happily and declared that they would follow the emperor's commands, and that her father would rejoin the Knight Order that very day. The commanding soldiers were visibly stunned by her resolve. Teasing him for having deceived her, Alara's words elicited a laugh and a tender apology from David, who praised her cleverness for buying them precious time to escape. As he began packing their belongings, Alara remarked that, despite the dire circumstances, her father sometimes looked as ridiculous as the village idiot, scary only because the knights were threatening harm. Yet, with a decisive sigh, she insisted that instead of running away, they should return to the Empire and rejoin the Knight Order. She declared her desire to live proudly in the capital and vowed to enroll in the Ability Training Academy to earn her badge as an ability user, for she was one by birth. David turned pale, questioning how she had come to know about the academy, and she revealed that Uncle Joe had informed her. David explained that he had always known this day would come, that the time would arrive when men like those outside would come for them. Even though he had fled the capital to spare Alara the fate of an ability user, he admitted that the noble life, though seemingly glamorous, held a much darker reality. In the Pavilion Empire, ability users were treated like royalty, granted noble titles, expansive lands, and vast wealth. They commanded the loyalty of many. Yet, these privileges came at a steep cost. They were expected to serve as the emperor's sword, shield, and staff, dedicating their lives as members of the imperial elite. In an empire where each day was a battle against magical beasts, these elite soldiers were little more than glorified war slaves. David recalled the sorrow of a friend he had met the day before his friend's death, pondering who might fall next and how long he could possibly survive. He confessed his terror at the thought of Alara enduring such a life. From the moment she was born 7 years ago, she had become his entire world, and the prospect of losing her was unbearable. With tearful resolve, he embraced her, and she, understanding his deep sorrow, promised to support him. She reasoned that if he did not return, the country would inevitably collapse. In the original narrative, David had rejoined the Night Order to avenge his lost daughter, even adopting the promising young Cheshire, who would later meticulously plan a rebellion from within the Order and spark a revolution. According to that story, in roughly 10 years, the imperial family would enact a mass extermination policy against non-ability users, a literal genocide of the ordinary, and only David Vornell could stop it. Alara, realizing that running away now would prevent her father from recruiting Cheshire and igniting the rebellion, asked if he truly wanted her to live a life in perpetual flight. David reminded her of her earlier wish for a simple life with him. Then, after a brief change of heart, Alara excitedly proclaimed that, as the daughter of an ability user, she would be the most powerful noble of all, dreaming of a life filled with macarons every day and dresses adorned with ribbons. Drawing on memories from her past life, she resolved to expedite finding Cheshire so that David's revolution would succeed. She declared that she wanted to be a noble and a true princess, explaining that returning to the capital would free her father from the drudgery of chopping wood and selling it in the market, and she teased that she would no longer have to do laundry, despite his constant reminders to the contrary. With a mix of defiance and innocent determination, she even threatened to claim a different surname if David did not accede to her wishes. In the end, David relented, and father and daughter prepared to depart with the Holy Night Order. Alara paused to gaze at her cherished cottage, filled with memories of a childhood she never imagined would end in such a manner. Her simple countryside life was over, and she wondered what awaited her beyond. Soon their carriage came to a jarring halt as Alara spotted a growing crowd in the distance. Curious, she asked her father about the commotion. The commander explained that the crowd was comprised of werewolves. Alara's eyes widened in shock as the commander admitted he had known that their habitat lay nearby, though he had not expected them to descend upon the village. He instructed everyone to remain calm while he dealt with the threat, and David, frowning in frustration, warned Alara to stay put and not venture outside. Exiting the carriage with orders for the commander to shield it, David solemnly declared that he would risk his life if even a scratch befell his daughter. The commander countered that such extreme measures were unnecessary, prompting David to brandish his sword and demand to know how long he was expected to wait while the commander handled one werewolf at a time. With breathtaking confidence, David charged at the herd, his blade slicing through them in mere seconds. Alara, left dumbfounded, witnessed firsthand the power of the strongest man in the world. A noble from a distinguished family that produced only top-tier ability users, the very backbone of aristocracy. He was, after all, the Empire's only swordmaster, known as the Silver Wolf of the battlefield and the undefeated soldier, David Vornell. After dispatching the threat, David chided the commander for merely standing by when he had ordered the carriage to be shielded. In that moment, Alara fully grasped that her father was indeed the protagonist. In the blink of an eye, she had become the daughter of the strongest man in the world. Their journey then led them to the southern side of Fascia Temple, where they planned to use the temple's warp gate, a rare device found only in major cities, to travel to the capital. Because commoners were forbidden from entering the capital in ordinary attire, they changed into more suitable clothing. Alara smiled as she found the new garments extraordinarily soft. The knights, curious about her age and the treatment she received from the Duke, inquired whether she was truly only 7 and whether her father was harsh. To their astonishment, she revealed that her father had once torn bears apart with his bare hands, a fact that both frightened and fascinated her. The conversation then shifted to the commander's past closeness to David, a detail that resonated with Alara, who recalled that 7 years earlier, the commander had assumed a key role following David's disappearance, becoming his closest ally and a future revolutionary comrade. After changing their attire, David entered the room where Alara ran to him, and he embraced her tightly, calling her his angel and affirming that she was his true princess. The commander, with a wry smile, remarked that David could be overwhelming at times and suggested they not waste any more time. Soon they passed through a portal where a host of priests greeted them, and Alara, mesmerized, took in the bustling streets of the capital. As they made their way home, she resolved to stay focused, understanding that the protagonist no longer needed to obsess over revenge for his daughter. Realizing that she had inadvertently jeopardized the original narrative, Alara decided that from now on, they must follow the established storyline. While traversing the capital, she observed blatant discrimination as many bowed in deference to them, a stark reminder that without such injustices, the spark for revolution would never have been lit, a spark that would later fuel her thesis in her past life. Determined, Alara resolved to locate the other protagonist, Cheshire, and ensure that he met her father, for her father could not ignite a revolution in this corrupt empire on his own. He needed Cheshire's strength by his side. Cheshire, one of the most powerful ability users and originally an abused, illegitimate child who was later adopted by David Vornell, remained an enigma in the unfolding tale. Alara pondered the mysterious circumstances of Cheshire's first encounter with her father, a moment the novel had never fully detailed. Given that David's daughter was clearly still alive, it seemed he had little interest in Cheshire, so Alara decided that she must contrive their meeting, even if it were as difficult as finding a needle in a haystack. As they passed a dimly lit alley, she noticed a small disturbance and asked her father what was occurring. David dismissed it as a trivial conflict, reassuring her that the patrolling security forces meant there was no real danger. However, Alara insisted on intervening to stop the fighting. Though her father hesitated, worried for her safety, Alara argued that his strength should protect her, and eventually, David consented. Approaching the scene, she found 2 boys roughing up another boy. Outraged, she scolded them for their behavior, startling the assailants. The boys then approached David politely to inquire about the disturbance, explaining that the altercation had begun because the commoner boy had failed to greet them properly. Alara's eyes narrowed in disbelief as she questioned whether resorting to violence was truly justified over a mere lapse in etiquette. The boys exchanged puzzled glances, unable to comprehend her fury, as they maintained that their actions were perfectly acceptable, a mundane exercise of authority over someone of lower status. Observing the scene with composed firmness, David ordered the boys to cease their troublemaking and leave. They complied without protest, and as Alara watched them depart, her thoughts swirled with a renewed determination to challenge the deep-seated inequalities of their society. Turning her attention to the injured boy, Alara knelt beside him and reached out to examine the bruise on his face, but he swiftly swatted her hand away. Softly, she apologized and offered him her handkerchief instead. As she studied his features, she was struck by the unusual charm of his disheveled hair and the striking combination of black and red in his eyes, a combination that made her heart skip a beat. In that instant, she realized that this was none other than Cheshire, the enigmatic figure shrouded in mystery within the original narrative. David stepped forward, extending a hand to help the boy stand, but Cheshire deliberately ignored the gesture and limped away without a word. Alara watched him disappear, her mind racing with the significance of this fateful first meeting, a twist of chance foretold by the original story. As she and David continued their journey toward the estate, a hesitant voice emerged from within her, asking if it were possible for her, despite her noble birth, to form friendships with commoners. David raised an eyebrow at the unexpected question, but responded warmly, explaining that what mattered most was her happiness, irrespective of one's social rank or magical abilities. Encouraged by his words, Alara confessed that she couldn't shake her concern for the injured boy. His pain, his expression, and his silent departure had deeply unsettled her. Determined to find him again, she expressed her desire not only to ensure he received proper care, but also to befriend him. David chuckled, his expression softening, as he pulled her into a warm embrace, calling her his angel and his little princess. His comforting words filled her with hope as they reached the estate, though her thoughts remained fixed on Cheshire. Resolutely, she promised herself that she would locate him as soon as possible and extend a hand of friendship, determined to understand the depths of his character. Later that night, at the imposing Marquis Onyx estate, the atmosphere was far from welcoming. Cheshire found himself at the mercy of Jonathan's wrath, an anger so fierce that Jonathan struck him repeatedly, venting his frustration. With a snarling tone, Jonathan expressed his contempt for having to share a household with someone he deemed unworthy, while his own father barked orders for silence, demanding that no further outbursts occur. The room grew tense as the cycle of cruelty continued, and Cheshire endured it all in resigned silence. Below is a completely reworked version of the text. Every sentence has been rewritten to preserve the original meaning and detail without shortening the overall content, and any repeated ideas or duplicate sentences have been removed. He remarks that if they cast him aside thoughtlessly, one must wonder what fate awaits him when he is apprehended during one of the Empire's sporadic ability user inspections. Should they discover that Cheshire indeed possesses an ability, they will begin to probe into his lineage, and it is only a matter of time before they uncover that his blood carries a notorious legacy. In that case, he will not only be branded as the man who sired an illegitimate child, but also as one who discarded him without a second thought. Jonathan then questions whether his father plans to announce to the world the existence of that so-called illegitimate brat. His father counters, explaining that this is precisely why they intend to imprison the child and raise him in secrecy. In a fit of indignation, Jonathan proposes that the boy be eliminated quietly, without anyone ever learning of his demise, as he finds it unbearable to even share the same atmosphere with him. At this, the Marquis shudders and hesitates before departing, admonishing Jonathan never to attempt such a drastic measure again. In the midst of these turbulent thoughts, Jonathan channels his fury onto the boy, beating him until his skin turns black and blue. Meanwhile, Cheshire silently ponders whether someone like him truly possesses any real powers. With heavy eyelids and exhaustion weighing him down, he longs for an end to the ordeal. He later lies still on the ground, motionless. In his thoughts, he entertains the notion that dying might be simpler, yet he wonders if the fear of death is what holds him back. Retrieving Elian's handkerchief from a tattered pocket, he recalls the earlier tumultuous events. Elsewhere, as Alara stands outside the Vornell estate, her nerves begin to fray. David, with a reassuring laugh, shows her that there is nothing to fear. Alara is perplexed by the absence of a certain eye, recalling that it has been many years since she last saw her family. The Vornell staff then rush out to welcome their master, and the butler tearfully reunites with him, his eyes lighting up as he introduces himself as Ron. As they step inside, Ran informs David that they had received word that the Holy Knights had been commanded by the Empire to retrieve the Master, though none had dared to hope for his return. As they converse about the current Master, Alara slowly comes to understand that he is her father's father, the man whose imposing presence was unmistakable whenever he appeared. Nordic Vornell, a noble to his very core much like her father, is also known to possess abilities of the Dos rank. When Alara read about him in the original account, his dignity practically leapt off the page. He had been exceptionally kind to Cheshire, maintaining an air of indifference in public while secretly managing everything behind the scenes. Alara dares to hope that he might be as benevolent to her as he was to Cheshire, though she wonders if that is asking too much. Ron further reveals to David that his sister, Lady Ordia, had been convinced she would eventually return and had been staying with the young masters for the past 2 weeks. This revelation is the first time Alara has heard of her father's sister, as she was never mentioned in the original narrative. Ran then informs David that he will instruct the dining staff to prepare a grand feast. Alara's eyes widen in astonishment as she steps into the opulent lobby of the palace, where every detail, from the intricately carved moldings to the glittering chandelier, seems otherworldly. Overwhelmed by the cavernous scale and the echoing steps on the grand staircase, her heart races with nervous anticipation as they approach a heavily carved door. David pushes it open, unveiling a stately study bathed in warm light and lined with towering shelves filled with books. Inside the study, Lady Aya's eyes grow wide in astonishment upon seeing her long-lost brother after so many years. Their father, Nordic, remains seated with a presence that dominates the room despite his silence. David greets his father with a casual smile, seemingly unfazed by the tension hanging in the air, while Alara lingers at the threshold, overwhelmed by Nordic's imposing figure. The intensity of his presence nearly suffocates her, and her nerves threaten to overwhelm her until, without a word, Nordic rises from his seat. His stern expression darkens as he turns to face David, the air growing heavier still. Alara instinctively steps closer to her father, seeking solace even as David remains relaxed and offhandedly remarks on how much Nordic appears to have aged over the years. The comment visibly wounds Nordic's pride. His grip on his walking stick tightens, and energy begins to crackle around him as his anger mounts. Before his wrath can escalate further, Lady Ordia intercedes firmly, reminding him of the child standing in the room, and her words force him to pause. Nordic's gaze then fixes on Alara, whose body stiffens under the weight of his scrutiny. His expression hardens further as he addresses David, his tone cutting as he chastises his son for having vanished without a trace, for raising a child alone for 7 years, without even sending a word to the family about his well-being. Alara feels her chest tighten with guilt, interpreting his harsh words as a rebuke of her own existence, believing that Nordic despises her for keeping David away from his family all these years. The thought churns her stomach and brings tears to her eyes as she silently condemns herself, thinking that if she were in Nordic's position, she too would loathe someone like herself, even though she had not expected a warm reception. Despite the sting of Nordic's reaction, she tries to console herself by reasoning that his anger is natural and justified, though deep inside she realizes she never wants to be the source of her family's bitterness. Lowering her gaze, she mutters a quiet apology, her voice trembling with remorse. At that moment, David steps forward gently, reassuring her by asking why his princess feels compelled to apologize, and then turns to Nordic, with a calm yet firm tone, urging him to soften his expression so as not to frighten Alara. Nordic silences him with a sharp glance, his attention returning to Alara, whose heart races as she braces herself for a potential outburst. To her utter surprise, instead of unleashing more anger, Nordic's hardened features soften ever so slightly as he leans in to gently caress her cheek with a warm, calloused hand. Alara's eyes open wide in disbelief at this unexpected tenderness as she looks up to her grandfather. Though his gaze remains intense, a trace of compassion now glimmers within it. David watches the interaction with barely concealed amusement, while Alien's confusion gradually yields to understanding. Slowly, a smile begins to spread across Alara's face as she comprehends the unexpected affection behind Nordic's gesture, and she formally introduces herself with a steady voice, despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling within her. Nordic's expression warms further as he pulls her into a firm yet affectionate embrace, and Alara wraps her small arms around him, experiencing a sense of belonging she had never anticipated. In that moment, the tension in the room dissipates as grandfather and granddaughter share a quiet, meaningful connection, observed with relief and joy by both David and Lady Ordia. Lady Ordia then takes it upon herself to introduce Alara to her cousins, casually revealing that she has 2 mischievous twin sons who, despite their roguish behavior, have hearts of gold. She confesses that they have always longed for a younger sibling, which makes her confident that they will welcome Alara with open arms. However, Deline deduces that if they are her aunt's sons, then they must also be the heirs of the aunt's ducal family. These twin heirs, destined to become the nephews of David Vornell, are fated for remarkable paths, one to rise as a holy knight and the other to become a magic swordsman. As Aurea leads Alara to meet the twins, her demeanor darkens slightly in recognition of the tragic fate laid out in the original narrative. In a world where death is a constant companion, both boys are destined to die. The twins had been among the few individuals to whom Cheshire, her father's adopted son, had truly opened his heart. The prospect that these two, treated as his own brothers, might lose their lives nearly drives Cheshire to the brink of madness. Gazing at Leon and Theo, Alara muses that they appear as if they were simply copied and pasted from the same mold. Aurea comments on their identical appearances and confesses that even she finds it embarrassing to admit that when the twins focus their efforts on fooling her, she can no longer distinguish between the two. she introduces Alara to the twins. The 12-year-old Theo smiles warmly as he introduces himself, and Alara is instantly aware that he was the first to die in the original account. Destined to become a holy knight, Theo was depicted as frail yet gentle and caring, a figure who looked after Cheshire like an older brother. And tragically, he dies the following spring after being knighted due to a rare congenital disease that suggests he has less than 4 years to live. Alara smiles and shakes his hand, prompting Theo to fondly caress her hair. Aurea then urges her second son to greet Alara, and Leon shyly comments that she is too small to be 7. Aurea explains that even though the twins look exactly alike, their personalities are as different as night and day. Theo is kind and gentle while Leon is mischievous, which causes her worry. Leon attempts to argue, but Aurea quickly hushes him, instructing him to mind his manners and speak politely. She reminds him that he has been warned on multiple occasions that if he continues to act out, girls will not like him, citing a recent incident in which his antics with a giant spider had frightened Lady Ballerina. Leon retorts that Lady Ballerina had confessed a fondness for spiders, claiming that his gift was meant as a friendly gesture and not as an act of provocation. Fidelaine, who is present, stares at the pair, realizing that raising sons must indeed be exhausting. Although Leon is destined to become a magic swordsman, known for his playful demeanor and a tendency to blurt out unfiltered thoughts, which often led to bickering with Cheshire, he in truth cares deeply for Cheshire. In the original story, during the large-scale monster subjugation battle around Volume 2, Leon sacrifices himself by shielding Cheshire from an ambush, a moment so poignantly written that it renders Alara nearly tearful as she recalls how Leon's heroic act made him appear both valorous and tragically pitiful. Gently tugging at Leon's sleeve, Alara introduces herself and suggests that they might even hunt spiders together, as she too is fond of large spiders. Leon, after a moment of quiet contemplation, unexpectedly pinches her cheeks rather roughly, causing Alara to cry, tears that come not solely from physical pain, but also from the emotional turmoil stirred by memories of the original narrative. Leon remains silent afterwards, thinking only that she is cute, and Aurea chides him to apologize quickly. Feline reassures Leon that she is fine and that it did not hurt, though she warns him to pinch a little more gently next time, leaving him red-faced and shy as he agrees. Later at dinner, Alara finds herself mesmerized by the extravagant feast before her, confused as to where to begin given the sheer number of dishes laid out. As she hesitantly trails behind, the master of the house, Nordic, makes his entrance. Aurea questions him about David's whereabouts, and Nordic informs her that he will join them shortly after he unpacks. Alara is so nervous that she struggles to even determine whether the meal tastes good. Nordic then turns to Leon, remarking that he had heard about a commotion he caused. Aurea chimes in that Leon has already apologized to Lady Ballerina, and she herself apologizes, mentioning that she even plans to have tea with the Countess Ballerina before leaving. Hearing this, Alara deduces that the giant spider incident has taken on greater proportions than anyone had anticipated. Nordic asserts that, as a 12-year-old Vornal, Leon should understand the responsibility his name carries, and he advises Leon to reflect carefully on his actions to avoid tarnishing the family reputation in the future. Leon apologizes as Alara quietly observes the scene, noting that her grandfather is exactly as depicted in the original tale, a paragon of nobility who upholds etiquette and decorum as if his very life depended on it, and who harbors an intense aversion to anything undignified. Meanwhile, Alara grapples with her own challenges. Having never been taught the proper etiquette of nobility, she finds herself uncertain even about the proper way to eat a steak. In a small act of defiance, she steals a glance at Leon, who notices her hesitance and inquires as to what is amiss. Theo soon joins in, asking if she is already full. Suddenly, Alara finds herself the center of attention at the table, forced to confront her lack of familiarity with proper table manners. Torn between honesty about her ignorance and the fear that revealing her naivety might invite further pity, she hesitates. Recognizing her plight, both Theo and Leon exchange understanding nods. Just then, David appears, and Alara feels an internal surge of relief at the sight of her trusted savior. Before David can suggest that they eat together, Leon begins eating his steak rather roughly, while Theo methodically cuts his into smaller pieces and then exchanges plates with Alara, giving her a portion with bite-sized pieces. Touched by this considerate gesture, Alara is filled with gratitude, and David smiles in quiet acknowledgement of the twins' thoughtful actions. As Oria offers a brief apology to her father, Nordic silences her and suggests they continue with the meal. At last, Alara is able to savor the delicious steak, and after dinner, David leads her to her new room. Overjoyed, Alara exclaims that she loves her room. David then asks if she remembers the boy they encountered in the alley earlier, promising that he will search for him immediately so that they may offer any needed assistance. Although Alara is thankful for the reminder, she had been contemplating the matter herself. She is well aware that, regardless of her father's actions, finding Cheshire will be a challenge. They had crossed paths by chance earlier, and according to the original narrative, he and her father will not meet again for another 2 years. At present, Cheshire is being kept hidden and raised on Marquis Onyx's estate, while David, having returned after a 7-year absence, is still unacquainted with the inner workings of the capital. He is not the type to rely on underground, illegal guilds to search for someone, and Alara suspects that she may eventually have to assist him. After all, when her father suggests that it will be nearly impossible to find Cheshire, Alara hugs him tightly and proposes that they retire for the night. The following morning, Ran introduces Alara to the household maids, Jetty and June, and informs her that David will now be confined to his office as he resumes his duties as the head of the household after his long absence. Alara finds this arrangement understandable. After exchanging greetings with the maids, the butler announces that he will update Alara on the day's schedule. He explains that the master has ordered her education to commence immediately, and that her teachers are scheduled to arrive at 10 a.m. Alara notices that the teachers seem somewhat apologetic about beginning her studies the day after her arrival in the capital, but little do they know that this is exactly what she has desired. With a burst of excitement, she proclaims that she is eager to study and will do her very best. The butler becomes tearful as he remarks that she bears an uncanny resemblance to the young master when he was her age. Shortly thereafter, Alara's math class begins, and she soon finds herself battling boredom as Countess Lena, the math teacher, proceeds to instruct her on basic addition and subtraction, although she is capable of handling lessons in etiquette and the liberal arts, which are essential for a noble. Solving elementary arithmetic problems proves to be a different challenge altogether. The Countess, growing increasingly exasperated with Leon's attempts to assist Alara with her answers, scolds him sharply. Alara, aware that she must locate Cheshire as soon as possible, realizes that she cannot afford to waste time on simple math problems. Cheshire, who was adopted by her family at the age of 13, should now be 11 years old based on the age difference with her father. This means that he must endure 2 more years of abuse at Marquis Onyx estate, a fate that Alara is determined to prevent. To achieve this, she knows that she must find one crucial person, the future head of the Intelligence Guild, who is destined to become her father's ally in the years to come. If she can locate him in advance and persuade him to join their side, not only will rescuing Cheshire become easier, but every subsequent challenge they face will be more manageable. However, to meet this individual, Alara must first sneak out in the guise of a mere 7-year-old, a task fraught with nearly insurmountable restrictions. Meanwhile, she finds herself stuck in a study room, solving math problems, having already memorized the entire 19 times table. Her concentration is broken when the Countess, now staring at her work in utter shock, exclaims that she has soiled her paper without even noticing. Alara, staring at her paper in disbelief, realizes that she has unconsciously written out the entire 19 times table. Even the twins are taken aback by this display of mental arithmetic. Panicked at first, Alara soon considers that the situation might not be entirely negative. After all, there are always a few children who excel at mental math. Determined to reduce wasted time, she resolves to quickly finish the basics so that she can help her father. With an excited tone, she asks her teacher if she completed the exercises correctly. When the teacher inquires how she managed it, Alara replies that she had explained it so clearly that it made everything simple. The teacher, momentarily confused, asks what exactly she had taught her, and Arlene chimes in by saying that if 2 apples appear 3 times, they become 6, thanking her for the lesson. At her utter relief, Alara hopes her teacher will let the matter pass, and ecstatically, the teacher declares that the princess is a once-in-a-100-year genius, a rare talent indeed. She promises Alara her utmost support in her education, even though Alara does not yet realize that this particular act of brilliance will later trigger unforeseen disasters. After classes conclude, Alara eagerly seizes the opportunity to enjoy some delectable confectionaries with the twins and her aunt. The pleasant moment, however, takes an unexpected turn when her aunt notices the arrival of Countess Ballerina outside, accompanied by her daughter Erica. Spotting Erica from a distance, Leon immediately ducks out of sight and clutches Alara tightly in a show of urgency. He groans in frustration, muttering about how vexing the situation is. Theo, observing the interaction, chuckles and offers a tidbit of information. Leon does not harbor particularly warm feelings toward Erica. In fact, a recent incident has come to light. During one of Erica's visits, Leon attempted to frighten her away with a giant spider, an ill-conceived prank that went awry and resulted in Erica getting hurt, thus earning Leon a severe scolding from his mother. Meanwhile, Erica cheerfully approaches Leon, only to freeze when she sees him embracing an unfamiliar girl. Her initial bright expression rapidly shifts to one of suspicion as she demands to know the identity of the girl. Oblivious to the shift in the atmosphere, a tension akin to a battlefield of conflicting emotions, Alara casually mentions Erica's recent fever in an attempt to change the subject. However, once it is revealed that Alara is Leon's cousin, Erica's demeanor softens dramatically. Pushing Leon aside, Erica warmly greets Alara, apologizing with a playful laugh and suggesting that Alara might as well start calling her older sister. In stark contrast, Leon's face contorts with disgust as his expression betrays his true thoughts, and Alara, now acutely observant of the dynamics, realizes that Erica's affections are not directed toward Theo, the seemingly obvious candidate for romance, but rather toward Leon, a fact that suggests Erica has a penchant for so-called bad boys, much to Leon's mounting frustration. Later that evening, after David finishes his work, he rushes to his room and embraces Alara tearfully. They exchange heartfelt words about their day, and David compliments her on her brilliance. For a moment, Alara feels uplifted by the pride her father shows in her, although she soon questions whether she truly is a genius. The scene then shifts to Alara being introduced to Robert Quinn, a member of the Magic Tower's Gifted Talent Department. David advises her not to be nervous and to simply answer Robert's questions, reassuring her that it is acceptable to admit if she does not know an answer. Earlier, the Countess had informed David of Alara's academic progress, declaring that she was so exceptional that no ordinary teacher could adequately educate the princess. She had even suggested that Alara should be scouted by the Magic Tower for early gifted education. To David's astonishment, his father had already been in contact with the Magic Tower, and he proposed that if Alara's test results were impressive, it would ease his mind about her future work at the tower. For the time being, David agrees to the arrangement. He is well aware that in the Pavilion Empire, while all high-level ability users are conscripted, researchers at the Magic Tower occupy the very bottom of the conscription list. Unless, of course, the Empire falls, in which case they would never have to fight in the ensuing bloody battles. David accepts this temporary reprieve. Alara later reflects that all these complications have spiraled largely because of mathematics. In the realm of magic, formulas are essential for casting spells, and those who craft these formulas are researchers at the Magic Tower. They all share one common trait: exceptional talent in mathematics. Indeed, the study of math forms the foundational principle behind magic circles, which is why the Magic Tower actively supports gifted education from an early age. Alara is well aware of this, having memorized much of the original world setting, yet she never anticipated that her exceptional prowess in math would eventually turn into a source of major trouble. It is as if, despite her brilliance, she sometimes feels more like an idiot. At that moment, Robert Quinn introduces everyone to Oscar Manuel, the youngest Magic Tower Lord in history. Alara is stunned at the sight of him, as she never expected to encounter such a prominent character so early in her involvement with the Magic Tower. Lord Oscar, however, is almost an adversary in nature, a figure whom her father, David, had once prepared for a rebellion gathering, along with high-ranking ability users, nobles, and political figures who were on his side. Despite his crucial role, Oscar never truly aided her father until the very end. Had they secured the Magic Tower, a key element in the revolution, events might have shifted dramatically. Even so, Oscar is not entirely an enemy. Rather, his motives remain ambiguous to Alara. Unsure whether he is spouting empty rhetoric or if he conceals genuine understanding of her secret, she resolves to feign prodigious talent in order to win him over. For now, she focuses on solving the problems from yesterday's lesson. Dressed in formal attire alongside David and Robert, Oscar's demeanor remains cold and severe as he dismissively asks if they are merely jesting. He inquires if he has come all this way to watch the children frolic like in a playground, and orders Robert to double-check every detail of the equations. Changing the equation suddenly, Robert presents a new problem which causes Alara to gasp in surprise. Oscar then directs his attention at the 7-year-old, arrogantly suggesting that she attempt to solve a linear equation. Staring down at the problem, Alara comments that she does not know the answer. Robert tells her not to be disheartened, explaining that even prodigies scouted by the Magic Tower often struggle with this problem at her age. David and Nordic both assure her that she performed admirably. However, Oscar sighs and remarks that he has wasted his time on a fool. David retorts sharply, ordering Oscar to apologize to his daughter, but Oscar insists that David himself should apologize for squandering his precious time. David demands to know who authorized Oscar's personal appearance, and Oscar curtly explains that curiosity had driven him to check on her progress. He adds that although Alara is the daughter of David Vornell, she appears no different from the other disappointing children he has encountered. In response, David reminds him that he could never do what his daughter has accomplished at the age of 7. Oscar counters that he, too, had achieved similar feats at that age. A tense exchange ensues in which David insists that Oscar apologize, but Oscar continues to hurl insults, claiming that Alara is one among many mediocrities in this field. Finally, Alara intervenes, stating that if she answers the equation correctly, Oscar must apologize to both her father and grandfather for his rudeness. Oscar smirks and, albeit reluctantly, agrees to the condition. Despite David's suggestion that she not strain herself, Alara begins working through the equation. Within minutes, she finishes and confidently announces that Oscar Manuel is 17 years old. Taken aback by her swift response, Oscar concedes defeat and apologizes for any offense he may have caused. Alara is shocked by the sudden change in his demeanor. Just moments before, he had been so insolent. Yet now he is overly polite. She wonders if he had been on the verge of an explosive outburst, only for some kind of strange madness to settle in his eyes. After this incident, Oscar joins the Vornell family for dinner and later offers to tutor Alara personally. Seizing the opportunity, she accepts his offer even though her attempt to impress him only seems to complicate matters further. After dinner, Oscar visits Alara's room to begin tutoring her using his magic. He causes papers to float as he lectures on the concept of coordinates in space, knowledge that is essential for forming a magic formula. Alara already knows that to craft such formulas, one must have an understanding of vectors, a topic that forms part of advanced natural science education. Oscar inquires whether she is familiar with numbers less than 0, and when Alara curiously asks if such numbers exist, he writes down an equation and challenges her to solve it. The problem appears deceptively simple, and after a moment of feigned contemplation, she provides an answer, clearly demonstrating her understanding of negative numbers. Oscar peers at her and comments that she is indeed quite small for her age, despite being 7. Alara is already aware of the underlying reasons for her stunted growth, and although Oscar jokes that perhaps it is because she did not eat enough, she knows that such matters are more complicated than mere nutrition. Oscar suggests, in his own offhand way, that perhaps working at the Magic Tower would allow her to grow bigger and stronger, and Alara promises to consider his words later that night. As the evening unfolds, Alara reflects on all those who have commented that she does not appear to be 7 years old. She had assumed that she was merely growing more slowly than her peers, but she now suspects that her unusual appearance is no accident. After all, as the daughter of the protagonist and the one whose identity has been hidden by circumstance, it is only natural that she is not ordinary. In fact, her father, David Vornell, was once kidnapped by the imperial family, a tragic fact that would eventually be revealed, leaving her to bear the burdens of a supporting role in the larger narrative. As her thoughts wander, David tenderly caresses her head and reminds her that it is time for sleep. Proudly, he boasts about how brilliant she was today, although Alara feels a pang of unease as she lies awake, troubled by thoughts swirling in her mind. David suggests reading her a bedtime story, a story of the princess trapped in the tower. Ever since she could remember, bedtime stories had been a nightly ritual, a fact that had grown monotonous over time. Nevertheless, she endured them because her father cherished the moments they shared. David begins reading. Once upon a time, there was a kind king who adored his daughter, the princess. On the day of her seventh birthday, however, the evil king of a neighboring realm kidnapped the princess. In his grief, the good king wept daily and offered treasures to the wicked ruler, only to be forced into servitude. Yet, even as the princess remained captive, the good king's sorrow transformed into a burning desire for revenge. Fate intervened when he met a boy of extraordinary strength, who he hoped would one day be a devoted older brother to the princess upon her return. The good king adopted the boy as his son, and together they awaited the day of reunion. But tragedy struck when the evil king reported that the princess had fallen ill and died. Enraged by this loss, the good king, joined by the young prince, waged war against the Dark Kingdom, eventually capturing the evil king and pointing their swords at him. David pauses and asks Alara if she wishes him to continue. Alara, whose eyes widen in shock and whose face pales at the familiarity of the tale, listens as David describes how the story mirrors events from long ago. In the narrative, David Vornell once embarked on countless battlefields upon hearing that his kidnapped daughter had perished, only for his sword to later be turned against the emperor. In truth, Alara holds a hidden identity, and the emperor, having learned of it early on, concealed and exploited her power. The daughter, brainwashed by the emperor, went on a rampage, killing indiscriminately. David Vornell, desperate to reclaim his lost daughter, found himself powerless until one day, Cheshire emerged to stop the carnage. As David closes the book, he muses that this is not a typical children's fairy tale, and he suggests that they stop reading it for now. Alara, however, insists that it's still a happy ending. When pressed, she explains that, had the princess not been kidnapped, the good king would never have needed to exact revenge, and in the end, the good king would have triumphed by destroying the wicked kingdom so that everyone could be happy. David, however, counters that if the protagonist, the grieving good king, remains unhappy, then it cannot be considered a happy ending. He questions how any father, having lost his beloved daughter, could ever find joy. Alara reminds him that in the original story, after Cheshire defeated David Vornell's daughter, the narrative concluded with a peaceful new empire emerging. Yet she ponders what became of the father in that original tale. Was he ever truly happy in the land built over his daughter's grave? With a heavy heart, Alara asks her father what he would do if she, the princess, were to die. David pauses in thought before embracing her tenderly, confessing that he would not be able to go on living. He reflects that the good king in the story felt similarly upon believing the princess was dead. He did not succumb immediately, perhaps waiting to die after exacting his revenge. David tells her that one day she will understand, especially when she has children of her own. Shifting the conversation, Lady Deline inquires whether all ability users are required to join the battlefield when the Emperor commands them. David confirms that they are indeed expected to, and Alara then mentions how he had previously assured her that she would be exempt. David elaborates that he has devised his own strategy, one that she can almost sense without him having to explain. He reveals that he will soon confront the Emperor alone, and with near certainty, he plans to petition for her exemption from military service. The card he intends to present is unmistakable. He will become as subservient as a dog to the Emperor, a sacrifice that the good king must endure in order to spare his daughter from the battlefield. In the end, even if Alara had not been kidnapped by the Emperor, her father would never have been truly free. Instead, he would have been forced into negotiating with the tyrant to keep her safe, a fate that would reduce him to nothing more than a pawn in an endless war. David's actions, always aimed at preserving her, underscore the tragic nature of the original story. The so-called happy ending for the main character is ultimately bittersweet, for he loses everything that truly matters once the narrative concludes. Alara realizes that her mission is not merely to help her father achieve a peaceful conclusion in the manner of the original story, but also to survive and remain by his side no matter what transpires after the tale's end. As David asserts that he is willing to do anything for her, Alara reciprocates with equal determination. In the hierarchy of the Empire, the DOS rank is the highest among ability users, followed by the others. An overseeing entity classifies ability users into 6 classes, and at the pinnacle stands Prima, the source of magic, an omnipotent force akin to a god. Prima is born only once per generation, and since the founding of the Empire, only the imperial families have produced one. It is the class to which the Emperor belongs, despite having had 14 children. The 48-year-old Emperor Nicholas Pavilion has yet to produce a Prima, and the absence of a new prima is causing unrest among the empire's people. Nicholas Pavilion, frustrated by the lack of progress and still feeling young enough to produce a prima, recalls that 7 years ago, when David departed, the emperor's fury had been palpable, a loss of power he had never forgiven. The unique nature of the prima, which consumes life force rather than mana, and whose lifespan is twice that of an average person, means that this omnipotent being can even brainwash talented individuals to ensure their loyalty, though this requires a tremendous amount of life force. This becomes especially significant when the target is someone as formidable as David Vornell. Despite still harboring ambitions, the emperor, known as the conqueror King Nicholas, has kept a few nations in his sights. Now that he has learned of Vornell's return with his daughter, he confidently predicts that David will soon present him with a magnificent return gift, one that will cement the empire's legacy, even if all else fades away. The next morning, Alara awakens with a gloomy realization that if she continues to grow at this slow pace, her true identity will eventually be exposed to everyone. Before she can dwell on this further, she remembers that her first priority is to rescue Cheshire. According to the plan, once she secures Cheshire's safety, she must promptly enroll in the Ability Development Institute, a crucial step, as only those with talent are granted the proper training to harness their abilities. In the capital, only the emperor holds the power to unlock the latent potential within these talented individuals, and Alara knows that she must begin using her own abilities as soon as possible. By tapping into her power and consuming life force, she can accelerate her growth to match that of others, thereby concealing her true identity. Her reverie is interrupted by the maids, who discuss the latest rumors about the emperor's child. Apparently, this time around, the imperial family has not produced a prima. They mention that whispers abound that the gods have abandoned the imperial lineage, an extraordinary occurrence given that the first or second child in every imperial family had always been a prima. Only a prima, and only a descendant of the emperor's blood, can become the crown prince. Yet Alara knows, deep in her heart, who the real prima is supposed to be. She is convinced that no prima will emerge in this generation. As her thoughts drift to the urgency of rescuing Cheshire, a mission that can be delayed no longer, Alara asks a maid for directions to the dispensary. There she meets Dr. Flynn, to whom she hands a bouquet of flowers she brought especially for him. In a hushed tone, she inquires whether he has any fairy tears, as she has heard that these rare, enigmatic healing herbs are reserved exclusively for the royal family and are dispensed only once a month to a select few. Dr. Flynn, clearly impressed by her poise, confirms that he does indeed have some and expresses awe at her precociousness, acknowledging that she is a direct descendant of the Vornell family. When Alara requests a small amount to prepare tea for her father, Flynn readily agrees. Now, with everything in place, Alara realizes that all she must do is sneak out. However, she is acutely aware that during springtime, a guardian is required for children to venture outdoors. If she were to ask permission, she would likely be hauled back inside by her hair. As she ponders who might be strong enough to escort and protect her on this secretive excursion, someone gently pokes her cheek. It is Leon who suggests they play together once her classes are over. Alara smiles broadly at the solution. Her older brothers, the twins, are gifted individuals who have already graduated from the training academy and have unlocked their abilities to a dos rank, making them the strongest in the household after her father, David. The first challenge, however, is persuading the twins to leave the palace. Alara theatrically collapses onto the floor, complaining of hunger and expressing a desire to eat commoner food rather than the lavish palace fare. When she mentions that she longs for the simple meals she used to share with her father in their former home, the twins contemplate calling the chef to prepare something more familiar. One of them even suggests simply leaving the palace to dine elsewhere. Their mischievous plan brings a happy smile to Alara's face, although she is well aware that if their mother were to learn of their scheme, they would face a severe rebuke. Nonetheless, the twins eventually devise a plan to sneak out of the palace. As they make their exit, Theo begins to feel unsteady and even admits that he is dizzy, though he quickly insists that he is fine. Alara recalls that he suffers from a rare disease, a congenital condition that was purposefully woven into the original story. Theo's illness, which was introduced as a stepping stone for Cheshire's personal growth and as a device to tug at the reader's heartstrings, is known as monoclash. This rare condition, in which divine energy and magical energy collide within his body, causing periodic seizures, means that Theo is living on borrowed time. Although the disease is said to be curable, its prognosis remains grim. Once Theo has fulfilled his purpose in healing Chazire's long-shut heart, the stage is set for his inevitable demise. Alara reflects bitterly on the cruelty of the novel's author as she considers Theo's tragic fate. In a poignant moment, Chazire, whose own journey has been marked by struggle, finally manages to decipher the ancient text that speaks of the saint's heart. After Theo's death, Chazire, having been unable to shake his obsession with the text, finds the saint's heart and lays it upon Theo's grave, whispering apologies for his tardiness.